Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to be here at this year's Glasswing International's Mental Health Conference. And my name is Leanne. I'm calling from Maryland, USA, and I'm super grateful to be here with you all to talk about the intersection of climate change and mental health. And to start off the session, I just wanted to invite everybody to take a moment and bring to mind a place in nature or a part of nature that warms your heart. And I just invite you to express gratitude and thanks for that piece of the earth that you hold dear. And so we'll all do it collectively. If you want to close your eyes, totally fine. You can keep them open. It could be your garden. It could be a plant in your space. It could be a park that you go to. But we're just going to start our session with an expression of gratitude for the natural world that supports all life and our well-being. And I'm really grateful to be here today. And we're going to start with quick introductions of our panelists. We have one other person that will be joining us shortly as they deal with connectivity issues. The speakers that are here today are amazing human beings who commit their life and energy to working at the intersection of climate change and mental health, and who bring both their own lived experiences and professional wisdom that I'm so grateful to be sharing with you all. My background in this area is I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit called the Climate Mental Health Network, and I currently work for an international nonprofit called the Collective Change Lab. And I'm very, very passionate about the role of nature and how to address climate change and mental health at the same time. So I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves. And the first question is, who are you? Where are you? Where do you work? And can you share about any lineages you're carrying into this space today? I'll go to Sasha, or I'll go to Io first, please.
Thank you, Leanne. It's pretty amazing to be here and on this panel with you again. My name is Ayomide Olude, and I am currently in Lagos, Nigeria. I work at Saucy Vibes as the project manager for the Eco-Anxiety Africa project. And today I am representing the lineage of the Egba subgroup of the Yoruba peoples from Western Africa. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you, Io, for being here. Over to you, Sasha.
It's a pleasure to join you today. Hi, I'm Sasha Wright. I'm a 24-year-old climate activist from Canada. I'm currently in London, though. I am the head of research and impact at Force of Nature and a co-founder of Force of Nature. We are a youth nonprofit that works at the intersection of the climate crisis and mental health. We really started because we recognized that young people desperately needed safe spaces to discuss their direct and also vicarious experiences of climate change and how it affected them, their families, their communities, and their hopes for the future. The lineage that I bring here today is my family. I live very far from home, but I have recently had my parents visiting me, and so feeling much more connected to the place and the lands where I was raised and where I feel closest to. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you both. One of the ways we practice the intersection of lived experience and climate change work is actually trying to bring our whole selves into how we do it, whether it's our ancestry, the context in which we live, the lands in which we benefit from, and who we are today in the world. And so we try to carry that in all aspects of how we do this work, and that translates to the mental health work we do. So my first question to our panelists is, why are you passionate about climate change and mental health? I'll pass it to Io first.
Thank you. But I would say, first of all, I'm passionate about climate change and mental health because I believe they are two of the most pressing issues we are currently facing today in the world. Over the years, I've witnessed the increasing impacts of extreme weather events, environmental exploitation and degradation in my country, community, and even for me personally. And, people were starting to struggle with anxiety and stress, relating to worrying about the future or dealing with the aftermath of climate disasters and the resulting non-economic loss and damage impact also. And these experiences drove me to advocate for an inclusive and equitable Earth. And that led me to also join Society Vibes, where I now manage the Eco-Anxiety Africa project, which we call TIP. And what we do at TIP is basically trying to understand the environmental related emotions from an African perspective, and also the interconnections of climate change and mental health through research, space making, and community action. And through my work, I am committed to contributing to building a healthier planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Sasha, where does your passion come from for this area?
Thank you. Not necessarily my passion, but my inspiration definitely comes from people like Io and like Lekwa, and yourself, Leon, who are just working tirelessly at the intersection that we're talking about today. I would say that the reason I think climate change and mental health is such an interesting and pressing place to put our energy is because it really takes us to the heart of what it means not just to survive, but also to thrive in a future that is safe from climate change. So for many young people like myself and like the people that we work with, we either through the direct experiences that we have or through the other young people that we speak to, we can often only conceive of a future that feels largely unsafe and uncertain. And I think that for way too long, climate change and environmental change has been construed as this sort of far off, far flung reality that's very divorced from our experiences. We talk about melting ice caps, we talk about polar bears, we talk about degrees of carbon, when in fact there are human faces and experiences that are actually far more affected by climate change. And so when we talk about mental health in the context of climate change, it forces us to go to that human experience of what does it mean to be a person in the world? What does it mean to be experiencing that uncertainty, that grief, that motivation, that powerlessness, that hope, all of those difficult and complicated emotions, and then really how do we develop resilience around them? As Io referenced, they are two of the most pressing issues in the world today. And if we go to the root of both of them, they stem from many of the same broken systems. So I think it's a really compelling intersection to find ourselves at. And it also opens up an entire world of possibility about what could a better future look like for us as well.
Thank you all so much. And I'm just trying to see if this is Lekwa joining us.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Leah?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you, but hi, Lekwa. Great to have you here. Could you just share who you are, where you are, and why you're passionate about climate change and mental health? Thanks for joining.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here. While I'm sorting out my video, it's a very nice question you asked. I got interested in climate change way back as at 2017. And it was something that I got interested in because of I saw, or rather I read, the impact that it had on people really. And so that was pretty much what got my interest, peaking, because I, for one, I'm very passionate about people, and seeing that this was something that was, in great danger to many people, especially people here in Africa. It led me to, like I said, Society Vibes too, and that was where I made my work very meaningful. So yeah.
Wonderful. So thank you for those introductions. And if these are people that have been really engulfed in mental health and climate change, so please channel questions into the chat, and we'll have a bit of time at the end to answer. So what brings us together today is this group of people on the call worked last year on an international research and action project called Connecting Climate Minds, which was a global effort to host dialogues and create priorities for research at the intersection of climate change and mental health. And our group, the people here today, were tasked with integrating lived experience leadership and wisdom throughout each stage of that project, from the design of the proposal to the design of the research project, to upskilling research communities in all 7 regions of the world, to then also bringing lived experience insights into the work of analyzing data that was gathered by research institutions. And so we bring, I guess, our lived experiences, both of climate change and mental health, but also some lived experience of working at this intersection and trying to center the voices and excellence and wisdom of people with lived experience in sectors that have traditionally marginalized and undervalued lived experience leadership. One of the interesting tensions that we grapple with is that there's lived experiences of climate catastrophe and the ongoing impacts of climate change, and there's also lived experience of mental health and mental unwellness. And they are sometimes distinct and they're sometimes intersecting. And what we really worked to do was to create an open and inclusive and expansive definition of lived experience that was welcoming to a vast array of people in their experiences. So the practice of lived experience is about inclusion, not creating exclusion. And so when in our project, we define lived experience as the unique forms of person-centered and communal knowledge, insight, and expertise that come from a range of experiences. And the goal of lived experience leadership work is to bring perspectives that aren't traditionally valued in research and implementation efforts, to not merely showcase people's stories and lived realities, but also to help bring new and creative dimensions to mental health and climate change action. And so when we talk about lived experience work, we talk about it just like we talk about academic expertise. It is a body of knowledge that we hope to value and uplift. And so my first question to the panelists is, can you share some of what worked well in our project and any methodologies that we use to integrate lived experience into this international research effort? I'll go to Sasha first.
Thanks so much, Leon, and thanks for the definition as well. To start off with, I suppose, it's not necessarily new to involve lived experience as a form of knowledge in these fields. You see things like co-creation and participatory research being used more and more. I think under the recognition that if solutions are going to be identified for people, then they need to be identified by the people who will be using them and who will be benefiting from them as well. There's been far too much research that has just been done for research's sake, interventions and solutions that have been implemented only to fall flat after kind of coming into contact with messy realities in people's lives. And there's also some problematic trends, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And so we really came in to bolster this growing movement to change these practices and to focus on things like fairness, on justice, and intentional involvements of that diverse experience in research and practice. So we did this through a few different methods in this project. And I think something that's important to discuss before I get into actually the nitty-gritty of how we implemented these tools of lived experience involvement is that approaching a research project like this, lived experience can't just be seen as something that is separate or siloed from the main project itself. If you have an entire body of academic outputs and then you put lived experience on a separate table, treat it like a kid's table, then it will only ever be used tokenistically. And actually, we wanted to recognize that behind all of the data points in the project were people's voices, lives, experiences, and make sure that whatever data was produced was really resonant with those lived experiences as well. So figuring out ways not just to have it as a branch or a portion or a working group, but actually how to embed it in everything that we did, including changing some of those research processes that can be really tough to change, which we'll talk a little bit about later. There were three main ways that I want to highlight that we concretely involved lived experience in the research project itself. As Leon said, it was a year-long project and it was a global project as well, which meant that we were learning from and involving voices from diverse geographies across time zones, different priorities, different experiences, and different solutions that were coming forward. The first thing that we did was we were careful to establish advisory groups and feedback processes. Obviously, when a project team is thinking about how to do this, it's up to them to discern what works best. But we decided that appointing these advisory groups where individuals who came from particular backgrounds could be remunerated for their time and offer their wisdom and expertise really to sense check what we were doing. Especially with research projects like this, they can move really quickly, and it's important to have sort of that grounding in reality with those advisory groups. Importantly, one thing that I want to say, especially working with advisors, is meaningful lived experience engagement doesn't try to attribute individual experiences to entire populations. It asks people to speak for themselves rather than on behalf of those entire communities. So with that in mind, we convened 3 main advisory groups. We had youth ambassadors. So every region involved, we worked with the 7 Sustainable Development Goal regions in the world. Every region had between 1 and 3 youth ambassadors. They had lived experience advisors. And then separately for the Indigenous people and communities workstream, we also recruited an Indigenous advisory group. Of course, before we started the process, we properly informed participants of their rights and responsibilities in the project, clearly defined what the project goals were, what the objectives were, and we also implemented transparency and clear communication as a whole. Something that's really important when you're working with advisors as well through the experiences that we had in this project. Obviously, there's a diversity of ways to do this, and we're constantly on a learning journey. But at the beginning of this process, we asked them, what do you want to get out of this? And also, what makes you feel seen and heard in this process? And we gathered some really excellent feedback from that. We wanted to make sure that we weren't exploiting their time, but rather creating a value proposition where they were also seeing how their input were creating influence and impact in the project. And one of the things that we heard, and I worked especially with the youth, so something that we heard from the youth ambassadors was, you know that you're being listened to when you see your input being reflected in the project. It's not enough to just offer an opinion and then feel like that's been a tick boxing exercise. People have taken that forward and then it kind of disappears into thin air. So with those advisory boards, we created a feedback process where we would come to them and we would talk about the work that we were doing. They would offer insight and input, and we would integrate those changes. And then we would come back to them and we would say, does this represent your experience? Is this accurate of your voice, of what you want to contribute? And can you support and endorse this? And that feedback process was really essential in creating trust with those advisors and also making sure that we weren't just cherry picking from their contributions. The second thing that we did was we implemented a story gathering process. So lived experience stories really hold significant importance for everyone as they really provide, as I said, that grounding in humanity. So those invaluable firsthand accounts of people's encounters with issues that affect them, that resonate with them, and at that intersection of climate change and mental health. Unlike things like quantitative insights, these stories can really offer pathways to sensitize audiences, whether that's expert audiences or lay audiences, to the human impacts and experiences. So story gathering was a really essential part of our project. Each of the regions gathered stories from the individuals who they engaged through the dialogues. And we also worked with the researchers themselves to gather stories of their experiences interacting with these issues, as well as our advisors who worked with us really closely. We were very conscious of creating processes for gathering stories and insights that were respectful and non-exploitative. So not going to people and saying, tell me about the worst experience in your life, and then we're going to capture that and we're going to put that out into the world, but rather really working with them to think about and talk about how those stories could be respectful and impactful depictions of their lives. We created storytelling guidance for each of the regions. And this brings me to my third point of how we integrated lived experience through the tools in the project, which is that there was a large amount of upskilling for those research communities, both how to learn these new ways of integrating lived experience tools, but also unlearning some harmful behaviors. A big part of that was decentering the researcher and recentering the subjects in the research to make sure that that research, as I said, wasn't just for research's sake, but actually it was serving purposes and bettering people's lives as well. So some of the ways that we did that were through upskilling sessions at the beginning of the project. So we did decolonizing webinars, trauma-informed learning webinars, as well as creating tools that the researchers could use, like storytelling guidance, so how to capture those insights that I referenced, terms of reference for engaging youth, which we created with the youth ambassadors, terms of reference for engaging lived experience, which we created with the lived experience advisors. And then as the project went on, we were available and responsive to offer consultation and guidance on things like data sovereignty, general check-ins, and also separate spaces to engage with and receive feedback from some of the vulnerable groups engaged in the project. One thing that I think was important for the researchers to recognize as well is we had these lived experience advisors, but we really wanted them to see that all of our work or all of their work was lived experience work. They were working directly with people who had lived experience in everything that they did, in everything that they gathered. So they couldn't just use these terms of reference when they were engaging with particular groups, but rather it had to permeate the way that they approached the entire project. I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sasha. And I hope from Sasha's sharing that when we talk about lived experience engagement in mental health and climate change work, we're talking about comprehensive, going above and beyond, taking every road stop you can to make it a more meaningful experience for the people that you're trying to serve and support at the end of the day. And so a part of our work was always asking the question, how do we actually create better conditions for the people we're trying to serve? And what does the bare minimum look like? And what does going above and beyond look like? And we always tried to strive for going above and beyond within resource constraints and budgetary constraints and capacity and time, all of that. But that was like a constant question on our hearts and minds. Another was that when we talk about lived experiences, it's also a question of access and whose voices are getting to the table. And we know that in a global project, digital divides are a big issue, and that when you're trying to actually source people's lived realities to inform the project, you have to actually go to where they are. So Ayo, how did we in the project try to create pathways of engagement that broke through digital divides of people that still don't have good connection to like join Zoom calls?
Yeah, thank you, Leanne, for the session. And thank you, Sasha, for your amazing introduction into the old youth experience work. So for us getting into communities, we hosted regional dialogue in these highlighted communities, Port Harcourt in Nigeria and Bangalore in India. And because, like you said, Leanne, we recognize the limitations of virtual gatherings, and we wanted to engage young people in local communities who may not have digital access. And we chose these locations for their significant youth populations, rather, and the unique context around these regions. For example, Port Harcourt is located in the Niger Delta, where the struggle for human and environmental rights is pronounced due to crude oil exploitation. And Bangalore is a melting pot of traditions and history, and is also one of the most climate vulnerable cities in India. So young people in this region are already familiar with mental health impacts of climate change. Our approach was informed by lived experience terms of reference, like Sasha mentioned earlier, which we created at the beginning of the project, one of which is the meaningful youth engagement. And this term of reference, TOR, emphasized adapting communications to be youth-friendly and locally relevant. For example, using WhatsApp to reach out to people and calling them instead of the usual formal emails. Also, he highlighted considering diverse intersectionality of all participants. So they are not just young people, they are also women, they are also disabled people. All these were really highlighted when we're trying to approach these communities. Another thing was ensuring inclusivity through fair compensation, like an honorarium for participants to cover travel costs and other time costs, basically. Another TOR, which we incorporated, was the lived experience storytelling and gathering document, which guided our approach to ethics, inclusivity, and story gathering engagement. I also want to highlight our recruitment strategy, which was primarily through word of mouth, like I said, reaching out to people via WhatsApp and calls. And we leverage our network at Solstice Vibes, our network of local organizations and youth communities which we have in these regions, to share the invitation to participants, and also recommend participants for the dialogue. Why we would have loved to have, had this event in more cities, due to budget limitations, we just had to, pick 2 specific locations. So these documents I've spoken about can be accessed, on the project hub. We'll be dropping it in the comments chat. So if you want to go through the documents and also use it for your project, they are available for you at the source.
Thank you, Ayo. And at the end of the session, I'll actually share my screen and walk people through how to access these resources. And one of the things that we did in this project is that we documented all of the processes that we undertook to engage lived experience leadership in it. And then we made them publicly available so that other people that are thinking about this intersection can easily learn from our mistakes and learn from the wisdom that we gathered, and then hopefully do this work and build on it. As I said, it's a living piece of work, because you're always trying to figure out how to make the conditions for people that are dealing with the most challenges at these intersections better. And so it's an ongoing, never-ending effort that we all are collectively committed to. And in that spirit, it's not easy work. It is a very challenging endeavor to work within traditional timelines. For instance, in this project, we had 1 year. And we talk about moving at the pace of trust, creating appropriate conditions for people to feel seen and heard, and not being forceful or dominating in how we engage, but welcoming and patient in creating those conditions. But that's not easy work, I think. And so, Lekwa, would you be able to speak to some of the challenges that can be encountered in lived experience work? And if there's any guidance you had on how we address those challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much, Leon. Lived experience work is one in which you need to treat with very, very careful minds and hands, really. And during our Quarantine Climate Minds project, the one that, like you said, spanned the whole of last year up until this February, yeah. There were a couple of challenges that we were able to, by team, navigate, and which I'm going to list them out now. And one of which was in data sovereignty. And we understood that most people it's very, very important for the data people are giving you, particularly, in lived experiences that they narrate to you, are very, very secure, even after they've told the stories. Because many of these people, whenever they narrate their stories, they are concerned about the exploitation of their stories, the consent, if there's any, behind their stories. And so we needed to actually make sure that around all sides, we made sure that their information was secure and without a breach of any agreement or whatnot. And secondly, was the use of terminology and language. Mental health, climate change has a variety of meanings everywhere. And so for someone coming from a particular place, they might have a different understanding to what mental health might mean. Maybe even someone here, and most people, plenty of us here down here in Africa, we do not necessarily connect to climate change and mental health a lot, really. And so bringing that term really needed a lot of explanation on what it was really, and not just contextually, but in a way that we all will understand what we're trying to communicate, really. And so it was very important for us to do that. And so at every point that we needed their intake, the participants now, at every point that we did their intake, we had to be very clear that this is what we mean by mental health. We mean X, Y, and Z by climate change. We mean X, Y, and Z by mental health impacts from climate change, just so we can carry a lot of people along. And talking also, another challenge that we were able to navigate was also in the demography and population, really. Hosting a dialogue funded by a global partner, many of us here can say that, we're usually, researchers in global projects are usually writing to the tunes of the funded many times. And so we needed to take this into cognizance when we were creating our dialogue, specifically, and also obviously in the general dialogues that happened around the CCM project. We need to take into cognizance the fact that this dialogue needs to be contextual. they must be relevant to every population, really. And so we made sure that, you know, if we said youth, we were specifically talking about youth. If we said indigenous people, we're talking about indigenous people and not anyone outside those borders because of many reasons, but also because of the trust that can be found in people finding out that participants in this group are people like me. And so it's easier for communication, really. And another challenge that we talked about, or that we were able to navigate rather as a team, which I'm very particular of, was the issue of exploitation. This is lived experience work, and you know, people really want to, unfortunately, make a lot of money from these kind of stories, and so they are usually very particular about, people rather are particular about what my information is going to be used for. And so whenever they're narrating stories to us, many of them might be not telling you the full story, or just not even wanting to engage with you at all because of the fear of exploitation. We've seen it in many cases when research goes on, and then after the research period, nothing then happens to the people that told the stories. And now I'm not trying to say that we should give back to them, financially or whatever. I'm just trying to say, like, morally and ethically, it's proper that things are done the right way and without exploitation, really. And so part of the way we did that was to build trust amongst the participants, helping them understand that, okay, hey guys, we are using your input here for a global research that is going to inform policies and hopefully actions in the future. Would you be willing to participate in this? And it wasn't a case of must, or it wasn't a place to say, no, I don't want to. Yeah, people had the choices to say, yes, I agree to this, or no, I do not. And so that was one of the ways we were able to deal with that. Another issue that we were able to navigate was the issue of fear of stigma. Coming from where I am here in Africa, it's difficult for people to be in touch with their emotions. It's difficult for people to be in tune with their feelings. And then when we have a global event like this that talks about this feeling that I've been shrouding deep in my heart, but I haven't had the strength to talk about. When I eventually get into this space, I do not, feel enough boldness to talk about these feelings, really. And so we understood that while going into the conversation, while going to dialogues, and we made sure that that the participants were able to express themselves as freely as they could. You don't have to speak; you could write it down. Even in the virtual dialogue and in the physical dialogues, it was quite unique. You could write down your thoughts. You could text. You could type it in the chat. Nobody was mandated to speak, and rightly as you should be in lived experience work like this. So we want the information, but it should not be done forcefully, really. People needed to feel like they want to contribute to this work because of the benefit that they see in it, right? Or rather positive impact that they see in it, really. And so, like I said, part of the ways that we were able to deal with this was through holding to our words, really. Like when we said youth, we meant youth. When we said indigenous people, we meant indigenous people. And so that was one of the ways we were able to deal with that. And I think I should say that in the work, maybe not connected to the challenges, but in the work, really, we were able to. It was very important for us to host and hold the dialogue in ways, hold and design the dialogue in ways that was very, very connecting to the participants, right? So in the sense that, for example, in our physical dialogues that we had in Port Harcourt, it was done by people in Port Harcourt. Myself and I really traveled, but it was also done alongside people in Port Harcourt. In the events in Bangalore, we had our partners in India that hosted a dialogue because we wanted to have a lot of, it was pretty much easy for them to connect, connect in the conversation, really. And so that was one thing that we also did as well. And also, Leon, like you said, there's a lot of challenges that comes with lived experience work. And even in these spaces, even in the dialogues, really, in the conversations that were happening, it was important for us to still have the presence of a psychological, I wouldn't say expert now, but the psychological support, really, pretty much. to help people, if, for example, they are not feeling so well, they do not feel like expressing their feelings, or they're having some sort of struggle doing that, and they need to leave this space. Our psychological support was there to help them navigate through the emotions that they were going through, really. And so these are just very few challenges that we encountered during the project. The whole project was a whole lot of learning experience for myself, and I'm very sure that hopefully with this with our insights in how we did our lived experience work with CCM, I'm pretty confident that it will be beneficial to other future lived experience work. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you, Lekwa. Thank you for all you shared. And one of the things that for mental health practitioners that are watching, one of the ways to engage in the climate movement is by offering your skill sets and accompanying these really challenging conversations related to climate change and climate crisis. So I often get approached by psychologists and psychiatrists and community mental health workers, and they're asking, how do I engage? One of the things that we did was we embedded mental health professionals in all of the dialogues to ensure that there was psychosocial support available to people that were processing really heavy and oftentimes traumatizing experiences, and making sure that when we were asking for them to do that with us, that we also were considering the need for care and support that may accompany that. And so one of the things that we really believe is that this is where, some of the intersection between these two fields can really happen. The ability to hold people's experiences and emotions, and also be able to healthily process complex and often traumatizing experiences, is a lot of the training of the mental health community. And a lot of the work of the climate movement is actually trying to make sense of the complexity of the crisis we're in globally and how it's affecting so many people's lives, particularly people that are on the front lines of coasts, of our rural areas, and who have the least access to resources. And so before we get into questions, I want to just do a quick round robin with everybody. What is one thing that you want to leave the audience with about engaging lived experience in climate change and mental health? I'll go to Sasha first.
Great question. I think I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to have two things, I think. The first one is that when we think about the mental health consequences of climate, I think it's really important that we understand that a lot of people's responses to climate are very rational. And that doesn't mean that they're not overwhelming, that they're not difficult, that they don't tip towards clinical presentation. There are things like anxiety and suicidal ideation and PTSD that need to be considered. And also, a lot of the things that people experience are very natural responses to what is going on around them. One of the questions that came up in the chat related a little bit to this, but I think one of the tensions in the project was we were working under a very biomedical framework, and oftentimes funders have particular ideas of what that's going to look like. And what we were hearing from communities were oftentimes much more action-based, where they weren't saying necessarily, we want only psychosocial support, but we want psychosocial support, and we also want the guarantee that we're not going to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be another crisis, or we want the guarantee that we're not going to have our lives and livelihoods stripped from us. And so a mental health intervention might look like psychosocial support, and it might also look like installing a clean water tap and talking about the benefit to health and well-being that brings to a community. So really being receptive to what communities want by way of support. I think oftentimes the infrastructure support and the mental health support comes as a package. And so considering the holistic view of mental health and well-being, rather than just the very specific clinical presentations of mental health when we're working with climate and mental health is important. The second thing that I would probably say is that, just referencing from before, lived experience is not a nice to have, but it's an essential. And when we work with people, we work with lived experience. I would love a situation where it's not even a term that we have to use, because it's just deeply embedded in everything that we do. And we're focusing all of our research on making sure that we're really hearing from people. A lot of the ways that we approach research work really well for things like RCTs, and for trials on very kind of empirical issues, but humans are complicated, complex beings. And so working with people requires us to see them as such and to respect them as such. Yeah.
Thank you. Aya?
Yeah. So I would just like to say is compensation for lived experience experts is crucial, and it's not just about the work. It can also include training or other capacity building sessions. So meaningfully engaging with people should not just be a power over structure, but a power where we work with them. I think we've said this through the panel. We work with people and ask for their input, and let them lead on projects that impact them, basically, which is key, to changing ample systems that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you. Lekwa?
Yeah, what I'll just say is that I would hope that researchers in lived experience, even after their research, engage with the people in a way that honors the courage and resilience of people. There's a way that you can compensate that wouldn't necessarily be what is needed. And so it's very necessary that researchers and not people in general should be able to try and understand the nuances and be able to respond to lived experience stories and narrative with the engagement that honors the people's resilience and hard work through the difficult times that they must have been.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think my message would be that, while climate awareness has been, and the impacts of the climate crisis, are growing, the mental health crisis has been around for a very long time. And the way that we see it is that climate is a threat amplifier and a burden amplifier to already pre-existing challenges related to mental health. And so when you think about floods, or you think about, extreme disaster, or rural communities dealing with hurricanes and drought and wildfires, whatever it may be, people that are already struggling with mental health challenges are going to deal with those challenges the hardest. And then they're going to have the least access to appropriate resources. In many places of the world, there already isn't access to mental health support. And so as the threats of climate increase, we really need to center people living with mental health challenges and what's going to happen to them, and other people with disabilities and other intersectional identities that may have amplified burdens when this work is happening. And so, one of the questions that came up in the chat was, how do you raise awareness for mental health problems associated with the effects of climate change different from other factors of mental health? And how does the population affected by climate change support mental health compared to basic needs? Because as we know, when there's flooding, basic needs are crucial. I'll quickly just answer that we believe in integrated responses that are valuing everything that's needed to create holistic support for human beings. So that means tending to physical, material, basic needs, also mental health needs, spiritual needs, cultural needs. And so when we're doing this work well, we're not excluding the types of supports that we're offering, but we're figuring out ways to integrate them. And in crisis situations, of course, that's very hard. But we know that right after acute crisis and after basic needs are met, we want there to be psychosocial support there. And we want people to have the tools and skills to be able to support themselves. We want parents to be able to talk to their kids about the mental health impacts of climate change effectively. And so I guess in the last minute, I just want to share with everybody how to access the resources that we talked about. And so if you go to Google and you type in hub.connectingclimateminds.org, you'll find a research hub. And when we talked about lived experience toolkits, if you go to toolkits right here, you'll be able to find this toolkit called Deepening Research and Practice, a lived experience engagement toolkit. And if you click it, you'll find a resource on all these different ways to engage with climate change and mental health. And so like it talks about the different pathways for LE engagement, different ways of reflecting in groups. And so this was a resource created by everybody here that we just want to make sure that everybody has access to. So with that, I just want to say thank you for joining this panel session today. And thank you to our amazing speakers, Sasha, Ayo, and Lekwa, for joining us and sharing their wisdom. And we hope to stay connected with you all. All right, big wave away.